Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure to be presenting. I have to say this is one of the first presentations that we have done on the Affirmation of Commitment document. And and it's a pleasure to be doing it in Italy first, for several reasons. One is that Italy has been a long-standing supporter of the ICANN process and model. And that's something that's been greatly appreciated, and it's been a thought leader within the European realm on how to make the model function well. So it's not only the country, but the individuals, Stefano Trompi and Laura and Giovanni and Vittorio. Vittorio served on our board at one point, and it's a community effort. And so it's a privilege to be here today to be doing one of the first presentations we've done since last week. With that, I'm going to talk briefly just about the affirmation of commitments and the key points. I know that Stefano had touched on several of these, and I wanted to share with you our perspective on this document. One of the most important factors is that this is actually a culmination of 11 years worth of work. And as is the case in any sort of relationship that one may have with an entity, when you change that relationship, there's also a process of defining the terms of how that relationship is going to change and how you're defining it moving forward. And the important factor of this is that we are actually concluding having agreements that are continuously renewed. We are concluding having discussions and reportings that are going to one government. And we are putting into a stable framework the concept of the model and leaving it to the community to strengthen it in the ways that it has in the past, but to put ownership with the community and the organization. So I think that's the most exciting part that I can think of. I'll cover some key issues. One is the conclusion of the Joint Project Agreement, which was the 7th amendment to the Memorandum of Understanding that we had with the U.S. Department of Commerce. Obviously, the signing of the Affirmation of Commitments and the options. The Joint Project Agreement ended, as you know, on September 30th. Again, the JPA was the 7th renewal of a memorandum, and it was a process that began in 1998. The board had been consistent about its public goal, and that was to conclude these continuous documents and renewals with one government, and to remove the external review by one government. That was an essential part and something that we heard repeatedly throughout the discussions over the past 11 years. The facts of the matter are that with the Joint Project Agreement and with the MOUs prior to that, the U.S. was the only government that was a party to an agreement. It was a 3-year term or a 1-year term in the ones prior. There were continuous reviews at the midterm and at the end. Well, the affirmation document is a document that is signed both by ICANN and by the Department of Commerce. It is actually the conclusion document and the terms and how things will be moving forward. So there will be no renewals. There is no reporting to the Department of Commerce on this document. This is a very different kind of framework that exists, and the terms and conditions of that framework are what's defined in the document. The board had been quite clear after listening to community input on what it wanted. The renewals of the Joint Project Agreement were eroding confidence with the international community, and I think we saw that during the WSIS discussions and also in the Internet governance discussions, that the ICANN model had been tested for 11 years, and that we needed to find some sort of charter of a permanent commitment and permanent existence. We believed that the organization had to stay private sector led, but a multi-stakeholder process, including government involvement. For historical reasons, that it should remain US-based. And historical reasons, I say, because it's where the internet had originally evolved. Dell had originally lived. It was where the headquarters of the organization, and so there's an understanding for that, aside from obviously the political attributes that are with that. That we had to ensure the participation of all governments in the GAC. We had to commit to continuous improvements. It's a living model. It has to continuously improve, and we had to be accountable to the community. The affirmation identifies some key points. It institutionalizes the coordination in one entity. It concludes this MOU and constant renewal process. And there's no overarching review of ICANN by the Department of Commerce. There are no more midterm reviews. There are no more annual reports. There are no more 13 reports to the Department of Commerce that had occurred over the past 11 years. That whole process has ended. What we will continue is obviously our annual report to the community. The affirmation also identifies the review process, which is by the community and owned by the community. And what I would say is that it is now up to the global community to define whether this model will succeed or fail. There is no excuse anymore of saying the U.S. is interfering in it. The responsibilities now lie with the community overall. There is no control by any one entity. It is now for the entities overall. And Department of Commerce and ICANN have committed to certain areas, which I'll elaborate. And the commitments are intended to be of long-term standing. They're issue areas that have come up by the community over the course of the years. In this document, the Department of Commerce has committed to support once and for all the multi-stakeholder model. It cannot go back on that, and I think that's an important thing for the future. We don't know where the internet will be in 10 or 20 years. This is an important commitment. They have committed to participate in the governmental advisory, among others. The decisions on the DNS have to be made in the global interest and global public trust interest, and nothing in the affirmation is control of ICANN by them. The ICANN commitments are to remain private sector, multi-stakeholder, not-for-profit, to act in the public interest, and this is an important attribute of the document that you'll see throughout it, to evaluate costs and benefits of decisions, be transparent, remain with the historical U.S. base, and undertake these commitments to reviews. Again, the reviews are by the community. They involve the CEO and the GAC chair in selecting the membership. The membership of the committee is put out for public comment and input, and they occur at regular intervals. One of the three commitments relates to accountability, and that's something that we've heard regularly from the community, is how does one remain accountable, and how does one remain accountable in a living organization? There's a role for the GAC and the board in this. There's a public input mechanism. Decisions of acceptance by the community. There have to be cross-community consultations. All advisory committees and supporting organizations are participating in this review process. This is the only review mechanism where the Assistant Secretary for NTIA, the division under the Department of Commerce, is also present. But I would point out they are present among the other supporting organizations and advisory committees. So they are one among others, not the sole one. The first review needs to be done by the end of 2010, and they need to occur every 3 years. There's a security review for security and resiliency, again involving all the supporting organizations and advisory committees on the review team, and that occurs every 3 years. There's a competition, trust, and choice review process, and that relates to new generic top-level domains in ASCII character sets or others. And this begins after 1 year of operation of the implementation of the new top-level domain process. And that, again, occurs on a regular basis. And these three areas are ones that we've heard a lot from the community about, and we felt were very important to capture in a document that committed an ongoing process of looking at how we can improve those mechanisms, but again, by the community overall, not by reporting to one entity or one government. On competition, trust, and choice, there's also a review of the who is process, but subject to national laws. Law enforcement is represented on this, along with the chair of the GAC. Privacy experts to be selected by the CEO and the Governmental Advisory Committee, and again, every 3 years. One would think that with all these reviews, we'll turn into a review organization and an expert body on how to conduct reviews. That's actually not the objective. We will look at how to implement this in a manner that is constructive, a manner that does not deviate from the operations of the organization, but builds it into the actual work of the organization. And that will be the next step that we'll be moving forward and discussing at the next ICANN meeting and working with everybody to make it function really well.
Thank you very much, Theresa.